Imagine this. It's 1987. You're standing on a deserted Italian highway at dawn. Behind you, the unmistakable wedge shape of a Lamborghini Countach idles like a caged animal. The V12 behind your head screams to life. You drop the clutch, and suddenly, you're hurtling toward 180 miles per hour in a car that looks like it fell from the future. No traction control, no ABS, no computer telling you when you're about to die. Just you, a gated shifter, and a thin line between legend and disaster. Welcome to the golden age of speed, where classic cars didn't just break records. They broke the laws of sanity itself. Before we had hybrid hypercars with launch control and active aerodynamics, before computers managed every millisecond of combustion, there was an era when speed was raw, unfiltered, and absolutely terrifying. The classic car era, generally defined as production models built before 1990, gave us some of the most visceral, heart-pounding driving experiences ever created. These weren't just fast cars. They were cultural phenomena, statements of excess, engineering marvels born from an age when horsepower was cheap, emissions regulations were practically non-existent, and the philosophy was simple. Build it big, build it powerful, and let the driver figure out the rest. Today, we're counting down the top 10 fastest classic cars ever built. These are production models, not one-off prototypes or race-only specials that you could theoretically buy from a dealership, though whether you could actually handle them is another question entirely. We're talking about American muscle cars with engines so large they barely fit under the hood, Italian supercars that redefined what a road car could be, and British bruisers that proved Europe could build tire-shredding monsters too. From Detroit's finest muscle to Medina's mid-engine masterpieces, these 10 machines represent the absolute pinnacle of speed from an era that will never be repeated. So buckle up, because we're about to take a high-speed journey through automotive history. This is the definitive list of the fastest classic cars ever built. Coming in at number 10, we have a car that perfectly embodies the phrase sleeper supercar, the 1986 Aston Martin V8 Vantage Volante, capable of exceeding 150 miles per hour. Now, when you hear Aston Martin today, you might think of James Bond's elegant Grand Tours or modern supercars with Mercedes-AMG engines. But back in the mid-1980s, Aston Martin built what British automotive journalists called Britain's first supercar, and they weren't exaggerating. The V8 Vantage Volante was an absolute monster hiding behind a gentlemanly exterior. Under that long, muscular hood sat a 5.3-liter V8 engine that produced around 400 horsepower. And this is the era before manufacturers were completely honest about power figures, so the real number was likely higher. This wasn't some high-revving, temperamental Italian engine. This was a British bruiser, all torque and thunderous exhaust note, delivering power in a wave that could break the rear tires loose in third gear if you weren't careful. The Vantage Volante was the convertible version, which makes its performance even more impressive. While other manufacturers were building stripped-down, lightweight speed machines, Aston Martin said, "Let's make it comfortable, luxurious, and faster than almost anything else on the road." The interior was wrapped in the finest leather. The walnut trim was hand-selected. The carpets were thick enough to lose your keys in. And yet, this leather-lined gentleman's express could embarrass Porsches and Ferraris at traffic light Grand Prix. What made the Vantage Volante special wasn't just its top speed. It was the way it delivered that speed. This was a car that could cruise at 70 miles per hour in near silence. The V8 barely breaking a sweat, classical music playing softly through the radio. Then, with a gentle flex of your right foot, it transformed into a fire-breathing monster that would pin you to those luxurious leather seats with the force of a freight train. The acceleration was brutal. The sound was intoxicating. And the experience was uniquely British, refined savagery, if you will. Only a handful were built, which makes the Vantage Volante incredibly rare today. But for those lucky few who experienced one in its prime, this was Britain's answer to the supercar question that Italy and America had been asking for decades. It proved that you didn't need to sacrifice comfort for speed, and you certainly didn't need to sacrifice character for performance. The 1986 Aston Martin V8 Vantage Volante was, and remains, one of the most special performance cars ever built on British soil. Sliding into the number 9 spot is a car that represents American muscle in its purest, most unapologetic form. The 1971 Plymouth Mustang Mach 1, capable of speeds exceeding 140 miles per hour. Now, before the comment section explodes, let's address the elephant in the room. There's actually a bit of confusion in automotive history here. The Mach 1 was actually a Ford Mustang variant, not a Plymouth. What we're likely talking about is either the 1971 Ford Mustang Mach 1 or possibly the Plymouth Countach, both of which were absolute performance icons. For the purposes of this video, we'll focus on the spirit of these early 70s muscle machines that represented the last gasp of the golden muscle car era before emissions regulations and the oil crisis strangle horsepower figures. The early 70s marked a pivotal moment in American automotive history. Manufacturers knew the party was about to end. Federal regulations were tightening. Insurance companies were making high-performance cars prohibitively expensive for young buyers. Gas prices were about to skyrocket. So what did Detroit do? They went out with a bang. The 1971 Mustang Mach 1, particularly when equipped with the 429 Cobra Jet or Super Cobra Jet engine, was a perfect example of this damn the consequences mentality. This wasn't about fuel economy or emissions compliance. This was about stuffing the biggest, most powerful engine possible into a fastback body that looked like it was doing 100 miles per hour standing still. The fastback design wasn't just for show, it actually improved aerodynamics, allowing these muscle cars to achieve higher top speeds than their boxy sedan counterparts. The long hood, short deck proportions were classic pony car styling, but they also served a functional purpose, providing enough real estate to accommodate those massive V8 engines that were becoming Detroit's calling card. Inside, these early 70s muscle cars were surprisingly well equipped. You got bucket seats, a sports steering wheel, and enough gauges to make you feel like you were piloting something serious. The Mach 1 variants often came with special graphics packages, hood scoops, some functional, some purely decorative, and enough chrome to require a full-time detailer. But let's be honest about what these cars were really about. Straight-line acceleration that could scramble your internal organs and a soundtrack that made every trip to the grocery store feel like a drag race. The roar of a big block V8 at full throttle is something modern cars, with their turbochargers and sound symposers, simply cannot replicate. It was raw, mechanical fury, pistons hammering, valves clattering, exhaust crackling, all combining into a symphony of American excess. These muscle cars handled like boats compared to modern performance cars, sure. The brakes were adequate at best, terrifying at worst. And the fuel economy? Well, let's just say you measured it in miles per gallon rather than miles per gallon. But none of that mattered when you mashed the throttle and felt several hundred horsepower trying to rip the pavement apart beneath you. The 1971 model year was particularly significant because it represented the absolute end of an era. By 1972, compression ratios were dropping, horsepower figures were plummeting, and the golden age of muscle was effectively over. But for that brief moment in 1971, you could still walk into a dealership and drive out in a factory-built monster that could break the laws of physics, and probably several traffic laws too. Roaring into the number 8 position is a car that perfectly represents Italian design meeting American muscle. The 1980 De Tomaso Pantera GT5, capable of approximately 155 miles per hour. The De Tomaso Pantera is one of the most fascinating hybrid creations in automotive history. Imagine this, an Italian exotic car with mid-engine supercar styling, but instead of a temperamental Italian V12 or a complex German flat-six, you pop open the engine cover and find a Ford the 5.8. Yes, the same basic engine architecture that powered pickup trucks and Mustangs was also the beating heart of one of the most exotic-looking machines of the 1970s and 1980s. And you know what? It was absolutely brilliant. The GT5 variant, introduced in 1980, was the widest, most aggressive version of the Pantera ever produced. It featured massively flared wheel arches that looked like someone had bolted on fender flares and then said, "No, wider. Wider." Ground effects ran along the sides. A huge rear wing sprouted from the back, and the whole package looked like it was ready to compete at Le Mans rather than cruise down Rodeo Drive. But here's what made the Pantera GT5 special. It combined Italian passion with American practicality. That Ford the Fifth 8, usually a 351 Cleveland, meant that unlike contemporary Italian exotics, the Pantera could be serviced by any competent mechanic. Parts were available at your local Ford dealership. You didn't need a factory-trained specialist with a degree in mechanical engineering just to change the oil. This was exotic car ownership without the typical exotic car headaches. The mid-engine layout gave the Pantera genuine supercar handling characteristics. Weight distribution was nearly perfect. The car felt alive beneath you, communicating every ripple in the road through the steering wheel and seat. And when you planted your foot, that American V8 delivered torque in a way that Italian engines simply didn't, a massive, linear surge of power that never seemed to end. The styling was pure 70s and 80s excess in the best possible way. The GT5 didn't apologize for its appearance. It didn't try to be subtle or understated. This was a car that announced its presence from 3 blocks away, and if you didn't like it, well, that was your problem. Pop-up headlights, that iconic wedge profile, and enough cooling vents to ventilate a small building. The Pantera GT5 looked like a concept car that somehow escaped the auto show and made it to production. Elvis Presley famously owned a Pantera and allegedly shot it when it wouldn't start. That's the kind of car this was. It inspired passion, whether positive or negative. You either loved the Pantera's brash personality and hybrid nature, or you dismissed it as a pretender to the supercar throne. But those who loved it really loved it because it offered something unique. Supercar looks, supercar performance, and muscle car reliability and character all wrapped into one outrageous package. The De Tomaso Pantera GT5 proved that you didn't need a prancing horse or a raging bull on your badge to build a legitimate supercar. Sometimes, all you needed was a great design, a proven powertrain, and the courage to do something different. And in an era of conformity, the Pantera GT5 was decidedly, wonderfully different. Charging in the number 7 spot is another Mopar legend. The 1970 Dodge Challenger R/T Hemi, capable of approximately 150 miles per hour. If you're a fan of American muscle cars, the 1970 Dodge Challenger R/T is probably already on your bedroom wall. This is the car that defined muscle car cool for an entire generation. That long hood, aggressive stance, and those distinctive quad headlights created an instantly recognizable profile that still turns heads over 50 years later. But the regular Challenger R/T, impressive as it was, paled in comparison to the Hemi-powered variant. The 426 Hemi engine was Chrysler's ultimate weapon, a 7-liter behemoth that was essentially a racing engine detuned just enough to be street legal. Officially rated at 425 horsepower, everyone knew the real figure was significantly higher. This was the era when manufacturers deliberately underreported power figures to keep insurance companies and regulators at bay. The Hemi engine got its name from its hemispherical combustion chambers, which allowed for larger valves and more efficient breathing than traditional wedgehead designs. In practical terms, this meant the engine could gulp down air and fuel like a hungry beast and convert it into tire-shredding torque with remarkable efficiency. The Hemi didn't just make power. It made an obscene amount of power delivered with a violence that could legitimately be frightening. Dodge offered the Challenger in multiple variants, from relatively tame 6-cylinder models to the absolute monsters like the Hemi R/T. This meant you could walk into a Dodge dealership and configure your Challenger exactly how you wanted it. From a stylish cruiser to a straight-line weapon of mass acceleration. Want air conditioning and an automatic transmission? No problem. Want the biggest engine available with a 4-speed manual and a rear axle ratio designed for maximum top speed? They'd build that too. The 1970 model year was significant because it represented the Challenger at its absolute peak. The styling was perfect, aggressive but not cartoonish, muscular but still elegant. Later model years would see declining performance as emissions regulations kicked in, making the 1970 Hemi cars particularly valuable to collectors today. Driving a Hemi Challenger was an experience unlike anything modern. You'd turn the key, and that massive engine would rumble to life with a loping idle that shook the entire car. The exhaust note wasn't refined or sophisticated. It was pure mechanical aggression, each cylinder firing with enough force to rattle windows. Put it in gear, and you'd feel the entire chassis tense up like a wild animal preparing to pounce. And when you finally decided to unleash that Hemi engine, absolute mayhem. The front end would lift. The rear tires would scramble for grip, often failing to find it, and instead leaving twin black stripes on the pavement. The acceleration wasn't linear or smooth. It was violent and urgent, a physical sensation that modern cars, with their traction control and electronic nannies, simply cannot replicate. The Challenger R/T Hemi wasn't just a car, it was a cultural statement. It represented freedom, rebellion, and the American belief that more is always better. More displacement, more horsepower, more attitude. In a world increasingly focused on efficiency and sensibility, the Hemi Challenger stood as a beautiful middle finger to practicality, and enthusiasts loved it for exactly that reason. Screaming in the number 6 position is a car that needs no introduction to anyone who grew up in the 1980s. The 1986 Ferrari Testarossa, capable of 180 miles per hour. The Testarossa wasn't just a car. It was a poster, a dream, a status symbol, and a cultural icon all rolled into one impossibly wide, impossibly red package. This was the car on every teenage boy's bedroom wall in the 1980s, positioned right next to posters of their favorite rock bands and athletes. The Testarossa was aspirational motoring at its absolute finest. Let's talk about that design, because it's impossible to discuss the Testarossa without addressing the styling. Pinned by Pininfarina, the Testarossa was instantly recognizable from any angle. Those side strakes, officially called radiator strakes but commonly known as cheese grater vents, weren't just for show. They channeled air to the side-mounted radiators, solving cooling issues that had plagued Ferrari's previous mid-engine flagship, the 512BB. The width was legendary. At 78 inches wide, the Testarossa was one of the widest production cars ever built, requiring special positioning of the side mirrors. Mounted high on the A-pillar rather than on the doors, just so drivers could see around those massive haunches. Parking this thing in a standard garage space required precision and prayer. But it was the engine that gave the Testarossa its name, which translates to red head in Italian, referring to the red-painted cam covers on the flat 12 engine. This was a 4.9-liter horizontal 12-cylinder masterpiece that produced around 400 horsepower and enough noise to wake the dead. The sound of a Testarossa at full throttle is one of the most glorious noises in all of motoring, a mechanical scream that rises in pitch and intensity until you either lift off or risk arrest. The Testarossa appeared in Miami Vice, cementing its status as the ultimate 1980s machine. Don Johnson's character, Sonny Crockett, drove a white Testarossa, and suddenly every real estate developer, Wall Street broker, and celebrity in America wanted one. It didn't matter that the car cost more than most people's houses. The Testarossa represented arrival, success, and absolute peak 1980s excess. Inside, the Testarossa was surprisingly usable for a supercar of its era. The seats were comfortable, the climate control actually worked, and there was even a small front trunk for luggage. You could theoretically drive this car cross-country, though the attention it would attract might make that journey exhausting in ways that had nothing to do with the car itself. Performance was staggering for the time. 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 5 seconds doesn't sound impressive today, but remember, this was 1986, before computers managed engine performance, before dual-clutch transmissions, before launch control. This was pure mechanical engineering, a manual gearbox, and a driver's right foot determining how quickly you got to speed. And that top speed of 180 miles per hour made it one of the fastest production cars in the world. The Testarossa represented Ferrari at a specific moment in time. Confident, brash, unapologetic about its success. It wasn't trying to be tasteful or understated. It was red, it was wide, and it was loud, and if you had a problem with that, you probably couldn't afford one anyway. The 1986 Ferrari Testarossa was the automotive embodiment of the decade that created it. And for that, it deserves its place in the pantheon of classic car legends. Launching into the number 5 position is an American icon that defined sports car performance for a generation. The 1967 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray 427, capable of approximately 150 miles per hour. The C2 Corvette, produced from 1963 to 1967, is often considered the most beautiful Corvette ever made, and the 1967 model year was the pinnacle of this generation. By this point, Chevrolet had refined the design, worked out most of the bugs, and offered the most powerful engine options ever available in a production Corvette. And the king of them all was the 427 cubic inch big block V8. This wasn't just any 427 engine. Chevrolet offered multiple versions with varying power outputs. The base 427 produced a healthy 390 horsepower, but serious buyers could opt for the L71 with 435 horsepower, or the absolutely monstrous L88, which was officially rated at 430 horsepower, but actually produced somewhere north of 550 horsepower. The L88 was essentially a racing engine that Chevrolet sold to the public, and only 20 were built in 1967, making them among the most valuable Corvettes in existence today. The styling of the 1967 Stingray was perfection. Those sweeping curves, the aggressive front end with hidden headlights, the distinctive split rear window on earlier models, and that iconic fastback roofline on coupes or the removable hardtop on convertibles. This was a car that looked fast sitting still, and when you actually drove it, the reality lived up to the promise. What made the 427 Corvette special was its versatility. This wasn't just a straight-line muscle car or a compromised sports car. It was genuinely capable of both. The independent rear suspension, unusual for American cars of the era, gave the Corvette handling characteristics that embarrassed many European sports cars. You could take a Corvette to a road course and actually corner with confidence, then take it to the drag strip and run with muscle cars that weighed several hundred pounds less. The driving experience was pure and engaging. The steering was heavy but communicative. The brakes, especially with the optional disc brake package, were adequate for the performance. And that big block engine? It was a masterpiece of American engineering, all torque and thunder, delivering power in a way that felt limitless. Plant your foot at virtually any speed, and the 427 would surge forward with authority, accompanied by a roar from the exhaust that let everyone within a mile radius know exactly what you were driving. The 1967 model year was significant because it was the last year for the C2 generation, and Chevrolet knew it. They pulled out all the stops, offering more options, more power, and more refinement than ever before. The following year would bring the C3 Corvette, which would be more popular and longer lived, but many enthusiasts argue that the C2 represented Corvette at its purest, focused, purposeful, and absolutely stunning to look at. Today, a 1967 Corvette Stingray 427, especially one with the rare L88 engine, or even the more common but still impressive L71, is worth a small fortune. But back in 1967, you could walk into a Chevrolet dealership and drive out in what was arguably the fastest, best-handling American sports car ever built for around $5,000. Adjusted for inflation, that's still a bargain for what you were getting, a legitimate supercar wearing a Chevrolet badge. The 1967 Corvette Stingray 427 proved that American manufacturers could build more than just straight-line muscle cars. They could build genuine sports cars that combine power, handling, and style into a package that could compete with anything from Europe. It was America's sports car at its absolute zenith, and it remains one of the most desirable classic cars in the world. Muscling into the number 4 spot is a car that represents the absolute peak of GM's muscle car performance. The 1970 Chevelle SS 454, capable of approximately 150 miles per hour. The Chevelle SS 454 is legendary among muscle car enthusiasts, and for good reason. This was General Motors throwing down the gauntlet and declaring that if Ford and Chrysler wanted a horsepower war, Chevrolet was ready to fight. And their weapon of choice was the LS6 engine, a 7.4-liter big block V8 that officially produced 450 horsepower and a staggering 500 pound-feet of torque. Let's put those numbers in perspective. In 1970, that 450 horsepower figure made the LS6 the most powerful production car engine offered by any American manufacturer. Even more impressive was the torque figure. 500 pound-feet at just 3,600 revolutions per minute meant you had access to tire-shredding power from virtually idle all the way to redline. This wasn't a high-strung, temperamental race engine that required perfect technique and high RPMs to make power. This was a tractor motor that would pull like a freight train from any speed in any gear. The Chevelle itself was a mid-sized car, which made it the perfect platform for this kind of insane power. It was smaller and lighter than full-size cars like the Impala, but larger and more substantial than pony cars like the Camaro. This sweet spot in size and weight meant the Chevelle could put its power down more effectively than lighter cars while still being nimble enough to actually be fun to drive. The SS 454 wasn't subtle about its performance intentions. The hood featured a massive cowl induction scoop that could be opened to feed cold air directly to the engine. The blacked-out grille, distinctive striping, and aggressive stance left no doubt about what this car was built for. This was a machine designed to terrorize stoplight-to-stoplight races and make quarter-mile strips your personal playground. Period tests showed the LS6 Chevelle could run the quarter mile in the low 13-second range completely stock, which was absolutely staggering for the time. With minimal modifications, headers, slicks, and some tuning, drivers could dip into the 12-second range, putting them in legitimate race car territory. Remember, this was a car you could order from Chevrolet dealer, drive home, and immediately take racing. No special preparation required beyond removing the hubcaps and airing down the rear tires. The torque was the real story with the LS6. Modern performance cars make impressive horsepower numbers, but they often require high RPMs to access that power. The LS6 delivered earth-moving torque right off idle. You could lug it down to barely above stall speed, mat the throttle, and the engine would pull cleanly and strongly without complaint. This made the Chevelle SS 454 not just fast, but incredibly easy to drive fast. You didn't need to be a professional driver to extract incredible performance. You just needed a heavy right foot and a willingness to replace rear tires frequently. The 1970 model year was crucial because it represented the absolute peak. The following year, compression ratios would drop, power figures would fall, and the golden age of muscle would effectively end. GM knew this was coming, which is why the 1970 models, particularly the LS6 cars, were built with a damn the torpedoes mentality. They weren't worried about what regulators would say next year. They were focused on building the fastest, most powerful cars possible right now. Only about 4,000 LS6 Chevelles were built in 1970, making them relatively rare even when new. Today, they're among the most sought-after muscle cars, commanding six-figure prices for pristine examples. But back in 1970, for around $4,000, you could own the fastest Chevrolet money could buy, a car that could humiliate exotics costing 3 times as much in a straight line. The 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454 LS6 was the ultimate expression of American muscle car philosophy. Cubic inches equal victory. Blasting into the bronze medal position is a car so rare and so extreme that even many hardcore enthusiasts have never seen one in person. The 1969 Chevrolet Camaro ZL. 1. Capable of exceeding 150 miles per hour. Here's what you need to know about the ZL. 1. It's essentially a race car that Chevrolet sold through their dealership network. Only 69 were built, and each one came with an all-aluminum 427 cubic inch V8 engine that was purpose-built for drag racing. Officially, this engine was rated at 430 horsepower. In reality, it was producing somewhere between 520 and 560 horsepower, depending on tuning and conditions. Chevrolet deliberately underrated the power figure for insurance and regulatory reasons, but everyone knew the truth. The all-aluminum construction of the ZL, one engine, was significant. While most big block V8s were cast iron and weighed over 600 pounds, the ZL, one engine weighed just around 500 pounds despite having the same displacement. This weight savings, positioned at the front of the car, improved weight distribution, and made the already nimble Camaro even more agile. But here's the crazy part. The ZL, one-engine option cost more than the entire rest of the car combined. The base Camaro started around $2,600. The ZL, one-engine option, over $4,000. This meant you were paying nearly $7,000 for a Camaro, which in 1969 was absolutely outrageous money. For context, you could buy two well-equipped Camaros for the price of one ZL, one, or even a low-end Corvette. So why would anyone pay that kind of money? Because they wanted to win races. The ZL, one wasn't built for cruising or street credibility. It was built for one purpose: dominating drag strips and street races. The NHRA require manufacturers to build a certain number of production cars with a specific engine to make it legal for stock and super stock racing. The ZL, one Camaro, was Chevrolet's way of meeting that requirement while also giving serious racers access to factory parts and warranty support. From the outside, a ZL, one Camaro looked almost stock. There were no special graphics packages, no wild spoilers, no hood scoops advertising what lurked beneath. You could option a ZL, one to look as plain as a secretary's car. This led to countless stories of unsuspecting street racers pulling up next to what appeared to be a mild-mannered Camaro, only to get absolutely destroyed when the light turned green. The ZL, one was the ultimate sleeper, capable of running quarter-mile times in the low 11-second range, completely stock. The driving experience was raw and uncompromising. The all-aluminum engine produced heat like a foundry, making the interior uncomfortably hot on warm days. The solid lifter valve train produced a distinctive mechanical clatter at idle. The heavy-duty 4-speed manual transmission required deliberate, forceful shifts. Everything about the ZL, one reminded you that this wasn't a normal car. This was a barely civilized race machine that happened to have license plates. Owners would typically drive their ZL, one, to the track, remove the hubcaps, air down the rear slicks, make a few passes, then drive home. The engine was durable enough to handle this kind of abuse repeatedly, which was a testament to Chevrolet's engineering. These weren't fragile, temperamental race engines. They were built to survive the kind of mechanical abuse that would destroy lesser power plants. Today, ZL-1 Camaros are among the most valuable muscle cars in existence. Clean examples regularly sell for well over $500,000, with the best examples approaching 7 figures. Out of the 69 built, most have survived because owners recognized their significance early on. But back in 1969, the ZL-1 was simply the ultimate weapon for anyone serious about going fast in a straight line. The 1969 Camaro ZL-1 represents the absolute pinnacle of what was possible during the muscle car era. It proved that with enough engineering expertise and complete disregard for practicality, American manufacturers could build cars that competed with anything in the world, regardless of price or origin. Roaring into the runner-up position is perhaps the most iconic muscle car ever built. The 1968 Dodge Charger R/T Hemi, capable of 156 miles per hour. The second-generation Charger, produced from 1968 to 1970, is arguably the most recognizable muscle car silhouette in history. Those hidden headlights, that aggressive stance, the flying buttress rear window treatment, and those distinctive round taillights created a design so perfect that it's still being referenced in modern automotive design. But while the regular Charger R/T was impressive, the Hemi-powered version was absolutely legendary. That 426 Hemi engine we discussed earlier in the Challenger, drop it into the Charger's slightly more aerodynamic body, and you got even better performance. The Charger's fastback roofline and recessed grille gave it superior aerodynamics compared to most contemporary muscle cars, and this translated directly into higher top speeds and better stability at those speeds. The Charger R/T Hemi was NASCAR's weapon of choice, dominating super speedways throughout the late 1960s. Drivers like Richard Petty made the Charger famous on the track, and those racing successes translated directly into showroom appeal. Dodge's advertising cleverly connected the Charger you could buy at the dealership with the 1 winning races on Sunday, creating an aspirational connection that drove sales. But what really cemented the Charger's place in popular culture was its appearance in countless movies and television shows. Most famously, a black 1968 Charger was the villain's car in the movie Bullet, engaging in what many consider the greatest car chase scene ever filmed. Later, the Dukes of Hazzard would make an orange 1969 Charger, the General Lee, one of the most famous cars in television history. These pop culture appearances ensured that even non-car people recognized the Charger's distinctive shape. The driving experience in a Hemi Charger was intoxicating. The interior was surprisingly well appointed for a muscle car, with comfortable bucket seats, a full array of gauges, and enough room to actually accommodate 4 adults. The Charger was a genuine grand tour. You could load it up with passengers and luggage and drive cross-country in relative comfort, then pull into a drag strip and run with dedicated race cars. That Hemi engine transformed the Charger's personality. With a more sedate engine, the Charger was a comfortable, stylish cruiser. With the Hemi, it became a weapon. The acceleration was brutal, 0 to 60 in well under 6 seconds, which was supercar territory for the late 1960s. The quarter-mile passed in the low 13ths, and given enough road, you could push the speedometer past 150 miles per hour, feeling the Charger's aerodynamics working to keep the car stable at speeds that would make contemporary cars feel dangerously unsettled. The sound was unforgettable. The Hemi's distinctive loping idle, created by the aggressive camshaft profile, created a rhythm you could feel through the entire chassis. Nail the throttle, and that Hemi would bellow through the exhaust like a mechanical god awakening, each cylinder firing with enough authority to make bystanders' chest cavities vibrate. This wasn't background noise. This was an event. The 1968 Charger R/T Hemi represented Dodge at their absolute creative and engineering peak. They'd created a car that was beautiful, practical, fast, and culturally significant. It proved that muscle cars didn't have to be crude, single-purpose machines. They could be sophisticated, well-designed vehicles that happened to also be absolutely terrifying when you wanted them to be. The 1968 Dodge Charger R/T Hemi was the complete package, and its legendary status is entirely deserved. And finally, taking the #1 spot as the fastest classic car ever built is a machine that defined the supercar genre for an entire generation. The 1987 Lamborghini Countach LP 500 QV, capable of exceeding 180 miles per hour. Let's be absolutely clear. The Lamborghini Countach wasn't just a fast car. It was a cultural phenomenon. This was the car that made children dream, that made adults stare, that redefined what an automobile could be. When Marcello Gandini penned the Countach's design in the early 1970s, he created something so futuristic, so radical, that it still looks otherworldly today, decades after production ended. The LP 500 QV, which stand for Longitudinal Posterior 500 Quattro Valvole, indicating the longitudinally mounted 5-liter engine with 4 valves per cylinder, represented the Countach at its most developed, most powerful, and most extreme. This was the last and greatest evolution of the original design, featuring wider bodywork, more power, and improved drivability compared to earlier versions. That 5-liter V12 engine was a masterpiece. It produced around 455 horsepower, but more importantly, it produced an absolutely otherworldly sound. The V12 sat longitudinally behind the passenger compartment, and when you started it, the mechanical symphony that erupted was unlike anything else on Earth. It was a high-pitched, urgent scream at high RPMs, transitioning to a menacing growl at lower speeds, with intake roar and mechanical noise adding layers of complexity to the soundtrack. The driving position was famously awkward. You sat almost reclined, with a massive center tunnel housing the gearbox beside you. Visibility was severely compromised by the small windows and thick pillars, and the clutch was heavy enough to give you a serious leg workout in traffic. But none of that mattered when you dropped the hammer and pointed the Countach down an open road. The acceleration was violent. Unlike modern supercars with their launch control and sophisticated traction management, the Countach required skill and courage to extract maximum performance. Get it wrong, and the rear end would step out in a way that could quickly exceed your talent level. Get it right, and you'd be catapulted forward with a force that seemed to violate the laws of physics. The V12 screaming behind your head, every mechanical component contributing to the cacophony of speed. But the top speed was where the Countach truly earned its legendary status. Exceeding 180 miles per hour in the late 1980s made it one of the fastest production cars in the world, period. This wasn't theoretical or manufacturer claimed. Properly set up Countachs could genuinely exceed 180 miles per hour, and doing so was one of the most thrilling experiences available to anyone brave or foolish enough to try. The design elements were all functional, despite looking like pure fantasy. Those strakes on the sides, they helped channel air to the mid-mounted radiators. The massive rear wing on later models, it actually provided downforce at high speeds. The scissor doors? Well, okay, those were mostly for drama, but they also made it easier to get out of the car in tight parking spaces, and they looked absolutely incredible. The Countach's influence on automotive design cannot be overstated. It established the wedge-shaped, angular supercar aesthetic that dominated the 1980s and continues to influence design today. Every supercar with scissor doors, every angular exotic with dramatic styling, every poster on every teenager's wall owes a debt to the Countach. It proved that cars could be art, that they could be objects of pure desire beyond their mechanical specifications. Owning and driving a Countach was never about practicality. The visibility was terrible. The turning circle was enormous. The maintenance costs were astronomical. The cabin was hot and noisy. The controls were heavy. The ride was harsh. You couldn't carry luggage. You couldn't really carry passengers unless they were small and didn't value their comfort. But none of that mattered because when you turned the key and that V12 came to life, when you selected first gear and started moving, when people stopped in their tracks to stare, you were driving a Lamborghini Countach, and in that moment, you were living a dream. The 1987 Countach LP 500 QV represented the pinnacle of analog supercar design. No computers managed the engine. No electronics intervened when you made a mistake. No screens displayed information, just traditional gauges. It was pure, unfiltered mechanical connection between driver and machine. You felt everything, every input, every response, every vibration. It demanded your complete attention and rewarded skill with an experience that modern supercars, for all their superior performance and technology, simply cannot replicate. In an era before million-dollar hypercars, before active aerodynamics, before hybrid powertrains and torque vectoring and launch control, the Lamborghini Countach stood as the ultimate expression of automotive excess and performance. It was the fastest classic car ever built, but more than that, it was a statement that cars could be more than transportation, more than even performance machines. They could be rolling art, objects of desire, dreams made tangible. The Countach didn't just go fast. It made you feel something primal and powerful, something that connected directly to your soul. And that's why, more than 3 decades after production ended, the Lamborghini Countach remains the definitive supercar icon. The car that every exotic machine since has been measured against, and the undisputed king of classic car speed. And there you have it, the top 10 fastest classic cars ever built. From British bruisers to American muscle monsters, from Italian exotics to hybrid designs, these 10 machines represented the absolute pinnacle of speed in an era that will never be repeated. What makes these cars so special isn't just their top speeds or acceleration figures. It's what they represent. These were cars built in an era before computers managed every aspect of driving, before safety regulations neutered performance, before efficiency became the primary concern. These were machines built by engineers and designers who asked, how fast can we go? Without immediately following up with, but should we? They were analog, mechanical, raw, and utterly engaging in ways that modern cars, for all their superior performance and technology, simply cannot match. They required skill to drive quickly. They demanded respect. They could bite you if you got cocky. And that danger, that edge, that connection between driver and machine, that's what made them legendary. These classic speed machines remind us that performance isn't just about numbers on a spec sheet. It's about emotion, about experience, about the visceral thrill of controlling hundreds of horsepower with nothing but your hands, feet, and courage. It's about the sound, the feel, the drama of piloting a machine built without compromise. So whether your dream classic is a Hemi power muscle car leaving rubber on Main Street, a wedge-shaped Italian supercar screaming past 200 kilometers per hour, or a British Grand Tour doing the ton while wrapped in the finest leather, remember this. These cars weren't just fast. They were fearless. And in a world increasingly dominated by automation and intervention, that fearlessness is something worth celebrating. Thanks for watching, and remember, keep the shiny side up and the rubber side down.